Why Medicina? And why, for that matter, this video on the foundation of Medicina? One of the things that I've learned from being in relationships with over 100 women and talking and having conversations with thousands of people is that we have a vast, unmapped area in consciousness that is defined by a don't ask, don't tell protocol. Now, the void in data, the void in information, does not stay void. Our antipathy towards the unknown is so great that we fill in the void with projection. And one of the more disturbing things about this is that when I've checked out with dozens of people what they have projected into the void of ignorance, of the unknown that comes from not asking and not giving enough time to listen and to speak, is that the projections are 90% inaccurate, right? In other words, 99% of people will not ask the questions necessary to see an area deeply, nor will they make the time and invite speech in order to listen and understand a territory. And yet they will fill in the void with false projections that are then used as the supposition for what become destructive actions because they're based on several layers of false assumptions. And this is, in fact, one of the first reasons or answers to the question, why Medicina? Right. I've grown up in such a hectic cult, such a invisible culture, that 90% of the important things are not being said and not being heard. And in this fragmented, chaotic pace, there seems to be no time even to discover the implications of not knowing so much about one another. And so good relationships begin with seeing clearly, right? And our cult has a lot of barriers, right? Some of them are nobilized, with the idea of privacy. Privacy is just another word for I don't know what's going on in that area. And so I project what's going on in that area. And I don't ask and you don't tell, and the projections are often wrong. So that's the first kind of beginning, right? It's been an irritant in a dysfunctional culture my entire life. The sheer amount of invisibility. And the answer to that lies in Dunbar's law, which is that the human brain cannot deeply digest, cannot deeply perceive more than roughly 150 people, right? Our brains are organized and have a chimpanzee heritage. And when packs of chimpanzees got too big, usually by around 60 or so, they would divide, right? And so in order to deeply see and be seen, you have to spend quality time regularly, meaning for an extended period of time, with a limited group of people, or you will not see them, will fill the void with projection, and will act on those false assumptions in destructive and dishonoring ways. So Medicina, a group limited to a maximum of 150 people living in close proximity, sharing meals, sharing special events, provides a context going back to the tradition of villages 500 years ago, where you would know, or the feeling of small towns that feel safer, that feel more warm, right? That feel more hospitable, more neighborly, more intimate, right? Because there's only a few people. So that points towards a small, conscious, and respectful community. Now, the next point on this that really kind of the next point in this motivation cycle of why Medicina came when I was experiencing PTSD, attachment trauma, loneliness, fear of the rapid pace and dissociation of so many relationships, anger, grief, loneliness, hurt that I didn't know how to deal with, right? It was actually induced by a therapist at the Human Awareness Institute, Peter Sandhill, in a reenactment of childhood abuse under the influence of psychedelics, right? And so here, my therapist at my community instigated a traumatic reenaction that I didn't know how to deal with, and he only knew how to make it worse, right? He didn't know how to deal with it either. And so I was in a world where no one knew how to respond effectively to this psychological, physiological territory, right? And it was beyond suicidal levels of pain. And I embarked on a global odyssey, right? Visiting Thailand, visiting the Philippines, trying this, spending time in the ocean. I was determined that I was either going to find a way out of this horrific level of trauma and PTSD, or I was going to die and document the steps to my death if I could not figure out how to do that. And so I began a blog, a vlog, a video documentation on a website called Understand Trauma. Because as it turned out, a stranger in a cafe did a better job of introducing me to trauma and PTSD than any of my healers, therapists, and friends and lovers. And this was a huge eye-opener, right? Because I had been given PTSD by Peter Sandhill and the Human Awareness Institute after being given it by hippie and New Age parents and my Waldorf school kindergarten teacher. Right? I mean, it's mind-boggling, but my Waldorf school kindergarten teacher at Hawthorne Valley Waldorf School in New York and my godmother, when I would fidget a lot in school because of the trauma of physical and psychological violence at home. As a sensitive child, I just had so much anxiety induced by sociopathic levels of parental abuse. And my Waldorf teacher, godmother, kindergarten would send me into the cellar and tell me that I would be eaten by witches. And she would threaten to do this as, 4 and 5-year-old kid, right? She would threaten to send me down there. She would say, you're going to be eaten alive by witches. And you've got to stop anxiously fidgeting. or you'll be eaten alive by witches, which isn't the kind of thing that calms a child down. It's the kind of thing that makes you more terrified, right? So I've grown up with a terror in my body that no amount of therapy has done anything to resolve. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and multiple practitioners. And here it was, a stranger in a cafe that introduced me first to the paradigm of trauma and PTSD, right? And set me on the right track. And so I was traveling the world studying trauma, studying PTSD, and there were all kinds of hurdles to jump over. And the biggest hurdle was nobody understood trauma and PTSD in the way that I was experiencing it. I was navigating a territory that I was learning about in a traumatically illiterate culture. And the worst time you want to teach someone patiently about PTSD is when you have PTSD. But I realized that's the level of dysfunction of our cult. Our cult knows how to induce complex PTSD, traumatic violence in its children, generation after generation after generation. We have the competence to induce the trauma, but not the competence to heal it. And in a traumatically illiterate and hectic cult, it's left to people with PTSD, who are the most stressed out, impatient, pain-based people on the planet, to try and patiently inform idiots that they are idiots, right? Because it is profoundly idiotic to willfully remain ignorant of trauma. And it's astounding the commitment our culture has to this level of ignorance, right? Going back to some of my past therapists, once I learned and became competent and fluent in the language of PTSD, going back to some of my past therapists, I said, when I gave you this fight, flight, freeze protocol, when I demonstrated symptoms connected to the reptilian brain, it was a loud clue to anyone who was, doing their job that I was dealing with trauma and PTSD. But it was a stranger in a cafe who introduced me to the idea, not any of you, my therapists, who I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to. Right? Seem like something to attend to? No. Each therapist had their separate excuse about not only why this was nothing to do with them, but why trauma was not their specialty and shouldn't be their specialty. And they shouldn't have any responsibility to refer someone to a trauma therapist. In other words, my therapists were worse at owning up to the need to become trauma literate than the average person. Well, that's incredibly disturbing. 100 out of 100 therapists invited to do an interview on camera about the topic declined the interview for fear of looking bad. No one was actually focused on educating the general public. So if your therapists, your professionals, your experts are trauma illiterate and are more afraid of looking bad than helping the public become trauma literate, and don't want to become trauma literate themselves, right? What do you do with that level of stupidity, that level of cruelty, that level of black humor? And the answer is to create a small group that is trauma literate. Right? What would it be like to be raised in a traumatically literate group? Right? We don't know because we don't have that. Right? But I can tell you as someone with PTSD that one of the biggest burdens that an ignorant, traumatically illiterate cult places on its members with PTSD is the requirement, while in a horrific state, to do what the teachers and parents and governments should be doing, which is to educate the public on how to respond constructively. And so, again, changing the cult, changing the culture, it's too big to hand to any one person. But forming a small group with 150 people or less, much more doable, right? It's not too hard to find 150 people who are moderately intelligent, at least intelligent enough to know that they don't understand trauma and PTSD, and that it would be a good idea to spend 100 hours doing so, right? And so there again comes the focus to form a traumatically literate group, and Medicina is the answer again. So this would go under trauma literacy. Now, because our world is traumatically illiterate, I was running into all kinds of very small solvable problems that were not being solved because of traumatic illiteracy. For example, in the Philippines, at my favorite five-star hotel, where I would stay up on the top floor because the Filipinos like to honk their horns for entertainment, right? And so when you've got PTSD and every little thing sets you off, right? Trying to drop off to sleep, someone honks their horn, and you back up in anxiety, right? So I was up at the top floor, so that I could be above the horn honking, but the hardwood doors in the whole corridor would slam, and I would be instantly at high alert, right? And so I had to try and put felt pads between all the doors on my floor, which meant that I had to go out and find felt pads, right? Because no one was looking at this through the lens of, if you're trying to calm down from PTSD, you need a good night's sleep. If you've got PTSD, sudden noises wake you up into high alert. So I'm spending hundreds of dollars a day in this elaborate hotel to be constantly on edge. And nobody got it, right? And so I went to the island of Palawan, and I drove around trying to find some place that was silent. Looked like I had struck gold. So I book into my little, my next hotel, right? But the walls are thin, and then I'm listening to the neighbor's violent TV show. Again, right? It's maddening, right? You can't go and tell everyone to turn off their TV. So I check out of the hotel. I go down the road to a little bamboo hut, right? From a five-star hotel down to a one-star hotel. But could this at least be quiet? Well, it was for day one and for day 1.5. But then the neighbor's karaoke party arrived, right? And we've got to blast out karaoke songs, right? So no peace and quiet anywhere. So I'm running around as a fugitive, and no amount of money is allowing me to buy the certainty of silence, right? Now, I'll spare you the details, but this happened again and again and again and again and again. And what I did as a designer in my mind, right? I've been a designer, building homes, building landscapes, creating designs and ideas of all kinds. What I did as a designer is I estimated the cost it would take to prevent all of this, right? I was literally frazzled, angry, depressed at having the one thing I wanted in my control out of my control, which was silence. And realizing that silence is free as long as there's an intention of respecting it. And I'm sure there are places, right? But I didn't know any place where I could get silence. And so I did a lot of expensive experimenting, costing tens of thousands of dollars month after month to try and find the place that would have, the island of Palau, and I could lay out in the waves, in the shallow water about a foot deep. And that was healing, right? But I couldn't get away from the karaoke, right? Or I could go home and not have any warm water and not have the empathy of an empathic culture, such as the Philippines, right? Which was incredibly medicinal, right? I learned that certain types of massage got me through the day. So I would do 3 to 5 hours a day of that type of massage with a person that I trained, right? But I had to train them on how to massage me in a way that released and calmed down the PTSD, right? So as I was doing this for several years, in the back of my mind, I started making a list, right? Felt on all doors, right? No gas blowers, right? No horns, right? Refuge from cars. You get the idea. One after another, making a list of what would be an optimum environment to heal from trauma and PTSD. And what I discovered was that I was spending, I would stay at a 5-star hotel, not because I wanted any of the, quote, embellishments, but simply because they were often quieter, right? But they weren't quiet enough, right? But I would rather be in a hammock that was completely silent for $10 a night than $200 a night for a 5-star hotel, right? And so what I realized was that nobody was optimizing for healing and recovery, and that I was spending tens of thousands of dollars, which in and of itself was stressful because I didn't know how long it would last. I didn't know how long my money would last as well, right? And so I realized that all of that could, that for 10% of the cost, I could be having a 10 times better experience. But it would take some thought, it would take some design, and unfortunately, I don't know where that place exists, right? But I do know that most people don't have tens of thousands of dollars and years of free time to travel around and try and get through the day. And it seems cruel to leave them in trauma in a dysfunctional cult, right? And so I wanted to create a place for optimum healing and recovery. So this would be traumatic healing. And what better place than a traumatically literate small group of people at Medicina. Now, meanwhile, in Marin County, California, where I'm making this video and have lived the last 20 years, I was seeing rising levels of homelessness. And as I looked into it and wrote a book called Homeless in Marin, I discovered that the primary cause of homelessness, there are many, but the primary cause was that people's income over the last 50 years had risen, very moderately, maybe doubled over the last, the median income in Marin had doubled over the last 50 years. But housing prices were up more than 1,000%. And the divide was just getting worse and worse, right? Incomes were not going up as fast as housing prices. And I also discovered that it was illegal to build a house for less than $650,000 in Marin. That if you bought the cheapest land anywhere in the county and then built the smallest house that was allowable, meaning because they've zoned all the lots to require minimum square footage. On my lot, I'm legally required to build a 1,200 square foot house. It's illegal to build a 500 square foot house, for example. Illegal. Right? Tiny houses, save water, save electricity, save money, illegal, right? So it is illegal to build a house for less than $650,000. Right? If you follow all of the 1,000 separate laws, right? Many of them are formed into codes, building codes. You have to do this and this. If you follow all that, you cannot legally construct a house for less than $650,000, right? And the majority of people in the county cannot afford that. Well, I also discovered the bureaucracy and defense system that local government has to discuss the issue or respond to the issue, and that there is an incredible amount of sociopathic cruelty directed at homeless people in Marin. Right? It's pretty cruel to make it illegal to build a small house that people can afford. Just absolutely banning. It's illegal to hunt people when they're sleeping in their cars because they can't afford a house, etc. The defense structure in local government was so high, right? I couldn't even get interviews for my book from, idiots in local government that would happily kill their own people, sending them out on the streets, which vastly shortens their lifespan. You lose 27 years of life by being on the street chronically. Right? If you're homeless for your lifetime, you're going to die 27 years earlier. In Marin County, we were burning up. We were murdering, literally, 8,000 hours of human life every 24 hours by maintaining a legal structure that made it illegal to build low-cost housing, right? And punishing rather than helping local residents who were made homeless by those protocols. Now, when I realized that I could waste years just getting angry at the cruelty of local government and an apathetic population, I began to look around the world for a place that could provide a 10 times higher quality of life at 1/10 the cost. The average home in Marin, $1.2 million, right? So, but Marin has an incredibly low quality of life in many respects, one of them being trauma illiteracy, but so many aspects, right, that are just unsatisfying. So what if we could raise the quality of life tenfold while reducing the cost tenfold? In other words, 20 times better value. I call it 10x living. And I discovered that the same things that make for a traumatically healing and integrative environment are also congruent with 10x living. And so 10x living Medicina again. Right? A place, right? A place with 10 times the quality of life, 1/10 the cost, $100,000 infrastructure budget per person rather than 1.2 million. So there again, Medicina. Now, another thing that I noticed is that it's difficult to have deep, rewarding friendships in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's very easy to go to lots of different groups, but it's very difficult to go deep with a couple of people, to have quality time, right? And so I often go to Thailand, which I would consider the world capital of quality time, because I experience 10 times or 1,000% more quality time in Thailand than I do in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have more quality time with people in a month in Thailand than I do in an entire year in San Francisco. Spontaneous quality time, right? But, you know, I don't want to have to travel back and forth between two continents, right? To have my citizenship here and go and live the kind of culture that I want to create and experience in Thailand, right? And so Medicina, again, a place to drop down, go deeper with just a few people. So quality time. Now, another thing that, you know, I'm aware of, right? I've lived in the US my whole life. I've owned my business, right? So it's, you know, in depressions or whatever, business dries up for months or occasionally years. It's a very individualistic culture. I'm always aware in the back of my mind that if I get into a medical accident, I will not be able to complete my work. If I can't complete my job, I will not get paid. If I'm not paid at the same time I get a $100,000 medical bill, right, I go under. Right? It's a traumatic cycle where it's very easy to go down. Right? There's enormous things. When I travel, it costs $1,000 a month in Marin just to take care of my dog at a nice place. Right? It's, you know, when I head out of town, I've got like $10,000 of fixed costs, and it creates an unhealthy pressure where there's never the time to just drop in and see where things take me, right? Because at $10,000 a month, savings blow through very quickly, right? And so I haven't had a place to go deeply and be present. I also hate the experience of, you know, having to think like, I love my dog, but do I want to pay $3,000 a year for caring for the dog, right? Because of all the immigration and all of that. And so what I really would like is a sense of community animals, right? Where there's 5 dogs that are shared in community, and nobody has to pay any money to go on a vacation, right? Because they stay in the community in a safe place. Right? And where the fixed costs are so much lower that exploring art, that doing things like these videos, which make zero money, but are very important, right? Because they affect people's lives. Where you can spend time going slowly and deeply into what's important without the anxiety of chronic financial pressure. And again, Medicina emerges as a beautiful place for community animals and a far lower fixed cost, right? So lower fixed cost and community animals. Now, in Marin, everything is driving, right? Want to go out to eat, it's a 10, 15-minute drive. Want to go to an event, it's probably in the city, 45 minutes here, driving here. Everything is a driving experience, and it almost always involves traffic, right? So traffic and driving. Now, this creates an equation. I'd like to do this, but is it worth the traffic? And 90% of the time I say no, meaning 90% of the time I stay home with my wife, because I don't want to go through the stress and the traffic to get someplace, right? And so wouldn't it be amazing if, on, a compound with up to 150 people, if the most exciting events were in the community rather than got to by cars, and where you walked to them, and that rather than, street lights and fast cars, and that you walked through beautiful edible gardens to these places, rather than, where the experience of getting there was half of the fun. You get to go on a nice walk, right? So eliminating traffic and having better events, right? Like, I love cuddle parties, right? So they're usually around within 90-minute drive, a few times a month. Why not weekly cuddle parties? Like, I like biodanza. Again, usually around within a week, an hour of driving, but why not walk to it, right? And so again, events without traffic, and that comes to another thing like ecology. When you have to drive to everything, when you have to have enormous houses legally required by law, right? You have a tremendous amount of ecological footprint to live a rich life. But what if that could be reduced by 90%? What if the carbon footprint could be 90% lower while simultaneously avoiding a hassle of driving? So another thing that points to Medicina. Now, I've been a site developer. I've been a general contractor. I've been a landscape contractor, right? I've had 30 years of experience of getting projects done on time and on budget. And I would say that 70% of the work that I've done, right, millions and millions and millions of dollars, 70% of the work that I've done does not get utilized very much. And the reason is the nuclear family, right? If I do like I'm doing a $300,000 landscape right now for one woman who travels 40% of the year. So one woman for 60% of the year is going to enjoy a $300,000 landscape. That's fine. It's better than nothing. But what's being done is and then the same is true of the neighbor and the neighbor and the neighbor. There is an enormous amount of waste where nobody is enjoying things. Now, when you combine 150 people together, then the chessboard gets used all the time. The ping pong table gets used all the time. The kitchen is used all the time rather than one meal a day by one person in a hurry, rushing off to some other place where the $1 million house sits empty. Right? So I wanted to, do a couple of things. First of all, leverage all that experience to do something that I've never done before, right? I've never designed and done an eco-village based on all my years of intelligence, of learning and study, right? I do what the client wants, right? And so challenging and leveraging my abilities, donating my time to have a profound impact, right? Service, challenge, leverage, right? So again, what could be the most useful contribution I could make to the world? What is the most potent utilization of my skills and talents? Right? An eco-village surrounded by gardens with 150 varieties of edible fruits and vegetables. Right? It's a wonderful, wonderful utilization of my abilities right? It's worth doing, right? After 30 years, I'm frankly not at all excited, about this $300,000 project for this client. I think it's wasteful. It's not particularly creative, right? Most people like what everyone else is doing, which is quite boring, right? It's just very expensive. And so what makes that exciting to me is the ability to turn around and take the profit from that job and donate it to the nonprofit that I've formed so that I can buy materials and then donate my time. That's exciting, right? So I'm working to create community. It gives me a reason when I really don't feel that there's much of a reason to create expensive, boring gardens for rich people that don't use it very much. I would love to put those skills to use that, for people that enjoy them and are there all the time. So that's a big driver. And again, it takes me to Medicina. Now, my wife works for me in my landscape construction company, and we have picky clients. And so one of the sources of marital stress is when she drops the ball, the client complains about it, and then I have to complain to her to pick up the ball and make that right? But, it's an incredibly nitpicky environment, doing fancy projects, for some of the country's wealthiest people. And it's not as fun or as satisfying as doing something more organic on a large scale, where everything doesn't have to be perfect, right? And so the thought is we may have a better marriage and a better enjoyable lifestyle when, every little thing isn't a great disaster, right? That's, rich retired people, there's a drip on their faucet and, oh my goodness, emergency calls, every little thing becomes absurdly out of proportion because your life is so cushioned, right? There's nothing exciting going on. So in that sense, there again, could my relationships improve and my stress level go down living on a community of that nature? Now, another thing is I dropped out of Waldorf School to design my own homeschooling program under protest, meaning every single grown-up in my life protested the idea. But I did the calculations, and 90% of what I was learning did not seem to be relevant to my future. And the 10% that was being taught very unproductively, right? In a relatively unmotivated classroom of peers. And I estimated that I could save my parents thousands of dollars a year in tuition and simultaneously free up half of my time and make all of my subjects relevant and learn them more productively with the use of targeted mentors, which I did, right? Everyone was against it, my Waldorf teachers, my parents, and they were all wrong, right? Go figure, right? It was a very important learning experience for me that the culture, that the majority, that the grown-ups often have it wrong, right? And it's a bad setup for kids, right? I learned way faster with one-on-one mentoring. And if you pick useful skills like gardening or massage or cooking, and you show up fully, you don't have to pay to learn because it's a useful skill, right? You can start by pulling weeds, right? You're learning by doing. And so I've enjoyed teaching as well as learning through mentoring. And the idea of giving kids the opportunity to learn more useful life skills and spend time one-on-one with people that can teach them something is exciting because I know what it did for my life, right? So 10x education, I would call that. And so this all, right, every one of those things, housing our homeless, 10x living, I would say another is the extreme bureaucracy and discouragement. I went to my local county when I wanted to build my house, and they told me I couldn't build a tiny house, and I couldn't do a yurt, and I couldn't do this, all this endless stuff that I couldn't do on my own land. It was maddening. And the stuff they wanted me to do in many cases made no sense. I talked with all my neighbors about what I wanted to do, and they were all enthusiastic. But the local government said, you can't do this because it's not good for the neighborhood. I said, what do you mean? I've talked with each of my neighbors. Do you want me to have them sign? They said, well, we don't actually care about your neighbors, and we don't care about what you want. This is the code. And you're going to have to do these stupid things and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing them, or you don't get a permit. I was so disgusted with this that one of the things that I wanted to do was find a place in the world, a beautiful place in the world, where you could do intelligent stuff without being stopped with your own tax money. I've been in business for 30 years, and local government, national, there has never been a time where government has gotten involved with my business that my clients have benefited or that I have. In other words, my tax money has made the situation worse every single time I've had interactions with local government, with government of any size. And the reason for that is, right, the focus is on one size fits all. Fair, right? Fair, balanced rules. They apply to everyone. The trouble is, if you're really intelligent, you're going to want to innovate. But the laws were not invented for innovative intelligent. They were invented for one size fits all. So every time you want to do something really interesting, like handle your gray water through a reed bed, well, it's illegal. What about burying your dead in a flower garden as fertilizer? No, that's illegal too. What about not connecting to the grid and using this? That's illegal too. What about gathering your own? That's illegal too, right? What? It's all illegal. And when you understand that 90% of the best ideas are illegal, and that your tax money is going to be spent harassing you into doing stupid shit because policymakers lacked the imagination to see a better way, right? And thought that, Big Brother could be helpful, then it's a nightmare to deal with that level of stupidity. And so in picking the land for Medicina, a huge criteria is under the radar. You pretty much do whatever you want to do. Any structures under 25 square meters, no permits required, right? Music to my ears. A place where tiny houses are not only okay, you don't even need a permit. Right? Shipping container, no permits required, right? And so this was a huge form of leverage, right? Because my house would already be built and paid for in full with cash, if not for my local government, right? It's the endless process of codes and this that doubles and triples the cost of the house and slows it down, which then makes a bank loan necessary, which then makes insurance necessary, just one thing after another. And so the answer is a low government hassle location. And then finally, I love warm tropical weather. Medicina at Costa Rica has it. And so this project is happening for all of these reasons, right? The joy of 10x living, the joy of healing, right? And there's one other thing that I'll mention. I've traveled the world and formed friendships in Thailand and Philippines and Denmark and England and Italy, right? In the US, South America. And I've run into the cult or cultural wall again or again and again, right? One woman's family reputation was ruined in Thailand because we held hands in public before we were married. Amazing, right? And the amount of fear and stupidity that goes on in every cult in history is incredible. Right? We call ourselves a free country, right? It's not anything like it. Right? You can't even build and sleep in a teepee without being arrested and hauled off for doing this without. No, this is not a free country. And what I have run into again and again in my microcultures that I create with people is people say, I like this way of doing it, but the gossip, but this, but that, right? There is constant terror and paranoia of what other people think in bizarre and dysfunctional cultures. So what's the way around that? Right? When you have a much better way of doing something. I remember my wife did not want to hug me in public, in the airport. Right? Someone would see, right? This is what cultures do to people. They're nuts. Now, it's very difficult to move out, to deviate. Right? Even the word deviant is a dirty word. Dirt is a dirty word. The source of all life is somehow bad. Right? It's very difficult to deviate from a dysfunctional norm as one individual or a couple or one family. But if you have 100 people reinforcing, this makes sense to me, that's intelligent, this is better than the way we did it before. If you have 100 people all doing that, then some idiot stuck in their cult, can't open their eyes, goes by and insults you, it doesn't matter. That can brush off. But if it's just one, it's difficult, right? Because you're alone, because nobody understands, right? And I'm so tired of being in the nexus of tension between intelligence and cult programming. Because the cult will go for you. The cult is cruel, it hates deviation, it fears the unknown, and it will ruthlessly attack you if it can. Right? Just look at our prison system. But if you have enough people, it provides an immunity against that. When you're happier, healthier, more alive, freer, and when everything is paid for in cash and you're not beholden to anyone, right? That's an incredible thing. Now, finally, I'm finding it satisfying, so that would be called a microculture, right? And where to do it? Medicina. Finally, my greatest enjoyment right now is in volunteering for the nonprofit that owns Medicina. So I created Medicina, donated all of my profits to it, and now I'm volunteering my time. It's very satisfying. But I'm aware that many people cannot responsibly donate 3-4 hours a day of their time to help worthy causes, because they don't have enough money to sustain a dysfunctional cultural lifestyle, right? But move them to a lower cost lifestyle around other people who are all doing the same thing. And then it becomes affordable. More affordable for me to donate more of my time, more affordable for you. And I don't know about you, but I would love to hang out with people that are so excited about making the world a better place that they'd love to donate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day of their time in service of something bigger than ourselves. So this is why it's coming about. This is why it's the most important project in my life. And how about you? Which of these drives connect with you, right? It's limited. It's limited. Absolute maximum size will be 150 people, right? It's not trying to change the world, but it is creating a model, right? Because one of my visions in that what makes this transcendent as a nonprofit project is that every step of the way, every failure and every success will be documented so that we can provide a roadmap to any other group of 100 people that wants to live a higher quality of life with less ecological footprint, with less time and money and stress. Right? So that this model can become a foundation for anyone who wants to in the world to freely iterate, to take it and turn it into something of their own.